Thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important global conversation, which is just beginning to happen. In fact, it's been happening for 40 years, if not longer, but nobody's been listening. And what finally happened to get more of us to pay attention and to start listening was a 16-year-old Swedish girl named Greta Thunberg. She is more popular globally than she is in America. And I'm going to start with a kind of a hard-hitting joke that I hope doesn't offend anybody, but if it does, sorry. So if there's one thing that we all need to know about global warming, it's 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's the amount of temperature change to Earth's climate that scientists believe the Earth can withstand before we have major catastrophic sea level rise and other forms of environmental disruption. 1.5 degrees Celsius. Or, as some Americans would like to say, we don't use Celsius in this country, we use Fahrenheit, so global warming must not apply to us. Every disaster movie starts with a scientist who nobody believes. Well, scientists have been saying this for a long, long time. The first time that we had a significant understanding of the way that carbon affects the atmosphere, 1890. It's over a century later, and still we're doing the same old thing. Motivated, as Greta so poetically put it, by fairy tales of eternal economic growth. And she said that to the UN, and then she said, "How dare you?" This is a 16-year-old that had the audacity, the gall, to speak truth to power with a certain type of unique anonymity and autonomy because she's 16. What are you going to do when a 16-year-old comes up to a bunch of old white men and says, "Shame on you, how dare you?" She's got people to start listening. So the way that she started is a one-woman strike against climate change in front of the Swedish Parliament building. The next day, somebody joined her. Within 6 months, she had thousands of school kids around the globe protesting with her. The movement is known as Fridays for Future. So, you know, a really interesting thing, when Greta started this movement, what inspired her were the youth of America. There was a youth group in Florida that came out to protest school shootings. And she said, we need to mobilize in that way against the climate. I do have a message of hope for everyone. And I think that that's the most important piece. But hope, if not tempered by the reality of how bad things are, comes across as unrealistic optimism. And that's just as nauseating as being depressed about the whole situation. It's not going to do any good. People tend to look at overly optimistic behavior as pie in the sky and unrealistic. Greta will never use the words hope, she says. Her most powerful message is to shame the people in power. Shame is something that has been very effective as a tool. The Catholic Church knows all about that for thousands of years. We've been using shame to motivate ourselves into action for a very long time. I think it's an important tool, an important way to affect the emotional behavior of others, but at the same time, we do need to motivate ourselves to hope for something better. Greta was just named the Time Magazine's Person of the Year. The magazine is back there if anybody wants to leaf through it. It has some very important information. Greta's not the only one. I want to touch briefly on a couple other pieces. The Drawdown Project is a book edited by Paul Hawken, 100 Ways to Reverse Global Warming. Not just stop it or slow it down, which has been the conversation up to this point, but actually reverse it. The term drawdown is the time when we start to put less carbon in the atmosphere and sequester that which is already there so that we're actually having a net negative carbon impact on the Earth. That's important, and it's necessary, because the UN has had several, every year in fact, meetings about climate change. We have the Kyoto Protocols and the Paris Agreement. Paris is in 2015, Kyoto was in 1997. Now we have some very important international agreements that we've been made, pretty much none of which have been being followed. But even if they have been, we're still looking at 2 degrees Celsius, not 1.5. And if we're on the current trend, where the international community is not adhering to these agreements, we're actually looking at 3 to 4 degrees by either 2050 or 2100, depending who you listen to. The trends are really bad. Now here's the hopeful piece. Greta has sparked nonviolent protest against global warming. On September 20th of this past year, 2019, it was the largest nonviolent protest, climate strike is her word, in the history of humanity. A movement has started, and it's well underway. And what we need is for that movement to continue, and we need the older generations, not necessarily all you all in this room, but people that are resistant to these ideas, to become open to change. Now we've had that lesson also for thousands of years. When Galileo first came and he proposed his radical ideas, he was excommunicated. And now the scientific community is founded. All hail Galileo. And other revolutionary thinkers in their day were persecuted. We need to change that mentality, if anything. Let's be open to the new ideas, especially the ideas of the youth, because they're the ones that are going to inherit the planet. In a way, now I have all the respect in the world for the Drawdown Project and 100 Ways to Reverse Global Warming. But if you page through the book, you'll notice that these are the 100 profitable ways to reverse global warming. These are ways that are actually going to make money. So we're going to retool our economy in a certain way so that we can be sustainable and continue profitizing, or profiteering, you might say. However, a bigger shift is necessary than that. One, we need to change our mentality. Simple. We need to buy less crap. If all of us went home and second-guessed clicking the Buy Now button and told our friends to do that, if we bought less stuff, there would be less trash to be put away, there'd be less recycling that needed to happen. Simply buy less stuff. We have an addiction to consumerism globally, and especially in America. If you look at global trends, on paper, it looks like China is the biggest polluter of throwing crap into the ocean. Where does that come from? It comes from American consumer goods that we've bought, sold, manufactured, and purchased. And then we ship our trash to them, because we don't know what to do with it here. So we need this mentality, mindset shift. And in order to do that, social trends start when people become inspired. So shame, good, yes, whatever. But then on top of that, we need to have a mass movement. Think about in the 1950s and 60s, when we first pioneered the idea of going to the moon. Everybody was behind this. We had a global movement. Now it took a war to get us there, but we had the 2 major powers in the world competing to get to the moon. We need that kind of trend. Solving global warming might be tied to world peace in a weird way. Because we're talking about major changes. Charles Eisenstein, one of my favorite authors on this topic, has a book called Climate: A New Story. He talks about climate change being a rite of passage for humanity. We've gotten to this point in our civilization where we can't come any further on the same road trajectory that we've been on. Now we need to totally change our trajectory, and it's a rite of passage that we need to accomplish as a species, as a society. We need to wake up, she says. I think we need to grow up too. Because you look around at the business community, for example, with their eyes on profits. These are not adults, people. These are ridiculous teenagers that are obsessed with various ridiculous pursuits, and they've forgotten everything that's what's important. As a society, we need to reorient ourselves around morals, values, everything that we've lost since we've become essentially an atheist, rational, global civilization. And I'm not saying that we need to go back to the days where we believed in a fire and brimstone God, but we threw the baby out with the bathwater. When we threw out religion because of its dogma, we turned our back on spirituality. We've lost our moral compass. The Time magazine article is titled "The Conscience," referring to Greta. Humanity has lost its conscience. We've lost our soul. And in that, we've come so far off from where we can be going. We need to have a vision, an idea. What are we capable of as a species? Where do we want to get to in 2050, 2100? Where do we want to go? Surely, our lives are meant for a lot more than just coming home and clicking the buy now button and filling our lives with a bunch of crap. What do we want as a species? What are we capable of? What inspires us? What gives us joy? What really reminds us of what it's like to be a human in this eloquent civilization that we've created? Look around. We have electric lights. We have heating sometimes. We have really solved all of the problems that caveman was perpetually plagued by. And here we are. And we have no time to enjoy it. And we have no capacity to appreciate it. It's the number one thing. We're not present to this beautiful reality that we've created. Our average home right now is more luxurious than a king's palace in the 1400s. And none of us can truly, fully appreciate or realize that. And we can't blame ourselves for that. We don't know what it was like. But mindfulness and presence and just taking a moment to breathe and take it all in is something none of us really remembers how to do in our constant, just frantic behavior all the time. We work way more hours in a day than is necessary or useful. Because the more we work, the more we produce, the more we consume, the more we are hamstrung on a wheel. The solutions are doing less. Let's sit down, relax, love each other more. I take bubble baths. It's a tremendous way to live one's life. I don't use refrigeration in my house. Now, I'm not saying that we should all go and unplug our refrigerators, but the world would be a better place if we did. The reason that I do that is not necessarily for global warming, although in Paul Hawken's book, the number one cause of global warming, refrigeration, believe it or not. The reason that I unplug my refrigerator is because I'm extremely noise sensitive. It's a trait of Asperger's, to be hypersensitive to certain sounds. I can't stand going to concerts, they're way too loud. But in the world that we have, we in general are very numb to a lot of stimulation, such as noise, loud sounds, bright lights. We're very numb to that fact. And I lived in an ashram, spiritual community, for about a year, where it was very peaceful, very quiet. And then my return to civilization has not been a very easy journey. It's very fast-paced, very high-strung, very loud, very overstimulated. These are all problems that I think very few of us realize. And how are they tied to global warming? I hope I'm putting the pieces together in a way that we can all follow. We've lost touch with what's important, and we keep building a world that is more and more and more and more stimulated. We've lost touch with the ground of being, which is where we find happiness. joy, contentment, satisfaction, love. And this is a radical thinking, but these profitable solutions to global warming, fine, we need to do them. But then we need to actually change our behavior. That's going to be the hardest thing. That's always the hardest thing, is to change our behavior. So I'm going to conclude here and then take some questions. Al Gore has created the Climate Reality Project. And he trains speakers like myself to come up here and talk with more specific details on facts, figures, up-to-date statistics. I think that's very important. When we talk only about statistics, I think we're missing the emotional component, though. So I think both are needed. So I'm going to take his training in April. He offers these trainings. They're totally free. He offers these trainings to anybody who's interested, who wants to become a public speaker on global warming. And we need a lot more of us to get this word out. We need this trend to continue, to have the conversation. More and more and more of us, because it's a very important profession. I haven't found a way to get paid for it yet. But if you do want to donate to my Patreon account, seriously, we do need to find a way to have this profession be respected. Because other public speakers who are talking to corporate boardrooms about how to make their profits double, we're getting $500,000 a year. But for a public speaker on global warming, my mentor, one of them, Charles Eisenstein, who I mentioned earlier, he never charges for any of his talks. Totally free all the time. Because he wants this information out there. It's very important. Donut economics. I think that's the last point I want to make before just really opening it up. Donut economics is a new way of looking at our economic models of the world. Because currently, perpetual fairy tale economic growth, as Greta puts it, we think that we live in an open system. At least the economics of today believes that. But we're coming up against the biosphere. We can't keep growing when we live inside a closed system. So donut economics is a new way to envision this, where we have to balance the needs of ourselves with the needs of the ecology around us. Anybody Star Trek fan? Couple? So how do the Vulcans put that? The needs of the many versus the needs of the few. We've been in America more, I believe, than anywhere else. And I've traveled some, I'm not an extensive world traveler. 38 billion flights per day globally. That's not sustainable. In America, we've become very hyper-individualistic, very narcissistic, very self-centered. We need to change that. Not only to think about each other in our communities more than we do, put others first, but globally, to start thinking of ourselves as a global community. These are all very important behavioral shifts. There aren't a lot of progressive thinkers out there, like the theory of donut economics, that can really change our perspective. We have to be open to new ideas and not just keep doing business as usual. So what can you all do when you go home today? I'll take some ideas in a minute. My suggestion, don't buy as much. Number 2, encourage children, grandchildren, to be vocal. Encourage them to speak their ideas. Too often, when we're raising children, and I see this a lot, we don't really have respect. Respect your elders. Well, yeah, well, what about respect the children? Let's do more of that.